Darkcast Network. Welcome to the dark side of podcasts.
In the brutal winter of 1845, the wind howled across Isle Royale, a land of wilderness locked in an icy embrace. It was here, during the frenzied copper rush, that the promise of riches had lured people of power, and people wanting to strike it rich. But this story would become one of purposeful betrayal, desperate survival, and another ghost of Isle Royale. Centuries later, reports have been made of Charlie Mott, who died on the island, the eerie sight of a pale, thin figure seeming to be more of a whisper than a man. He wanders the shores, through the forests, forever in search of food that he never found. But as his eyes search the horizon, maybe he is not waiting for the supply ship that never came. Maybe, instead, he is waiting for those who betrayed him and cost him the high price he paid for the promise of copper. And maybe he is waiting for the man who lied to his young bride. Welcome back to Tragedy with a View. Hello and welcome back. I am your host, Kayla, and I need to start this episode with saying something very positive. As many of you are probably aware, I am a part of the Darkcast Network, and it was in one of our group chats that one of them mentioned that they have checked the, I guess it's called Listen Notes, which is kind of like a website that tracks data and compiles information about all of the podcasts that are out there. And so in this process, they kind of rank podcasts. And so, as many of you are probably also aware, there are a lot of podcasts out there. And I consider Tragedy with a View to be a small podcast. I've got a really solid group of listeners and subscribers, and I'm very thankful for everyone who continues to come back. But in comparison to some other podcasters that I know, this one just hasn't grown the same way, which is just the way it is. There's still growth happening. It's just different. And I guess this is where the positive thing comes in, because I didn't know about this Listen Notes. And thanks to all of you who continue to come back, Tragedy with a View is in the top 10% of all podcasts. And that's very surprising to me. And I cannot thank you enough. A lot of work goes into each and every episode, and I am not alone in that. Every single person who puts out a podcast puts in a ton of work in order for them to have episodes that are really special. So thank you. Thank you. I'm going to say it one more time just for effect. Thank you. Switching gears, today's story takes place on an island that I really want to go to. It is located in Lake Superior. Isle Royale is the fourth largest island in the world and the second largest island in the Great Lakes. Itself, it is 45 miles or 72 kilometers long and 9 miles or 14 kilometers wide. It was designated a national park on April 3rd of 1940, and the park contains the island Isle Royale, along with the waters surrounding the island that includes 400 other smaller islands adjacent to this main island. The national park contains a total of 894 square miles or 2,320 square kilometers, with 209 square miles or 540 kilometers of land and 685 square miles or 1,770 square kilometers of water. It is only 15 miles or 24 kilometers from the Canadian border, which is not land. This is a border in the water, and once you have crossed the border, it connects with Canada's Lake Superior National Marine Conservation Area. Isle Royale is also a designated wilderness area, so it has been protected from development since 1976. It was declared a UNESCO International Biosphere Reserve in 1980, and in 2019, it was added to the National Register of Historic Places as a Mingong Traditional Cultural Property. This area is rugged and beautiful, and with dense forest full of balsam firs, white and black spruce, sparkling blue waters surrounding Isle Royale, as well as in the inland lakes. The rocky shorelines have resulted in many, many shipwrecks in the area that have been caused by a combination of horrendous weather and a difficulty in navigating the underwater topography. There are 165 miles or 265 kilometers of hiking trails on Isle Royale, with one trail, the Greenstone Ridge Trail, which will take you 40 miles or 64 kilometers from one end of the island to the other. There is a boat shuttle that will then take you back to your starting location if you don't want to just turn around and walk it again. But the trail itself is hard and usually is done in a 4 to 5 day span. It will wind you through the wilderness, past glacial lakes, through swamps and bogs, along the ridges of shorelines, and even to the peak of Mount Desor, the highest point on the island at 1,394 feet or 425 meters. You will likely see old copper mines, and if you are lucky, you might even see a moose or hear some wolves. But you cannot get to Isle Royale all year round. Even the natives to this land only came to the island in the summer for hunting and foraging. This is the only national park in the United States that is closed during the winter from the dates November 1st through April 15th. Today, the island has two developed areas. The Ozagaten, also known as Wendigo, which is on the southwest end of the island and is the docking site for ferries coming from Minnesota. Here there is a camp store, showers, campsites, and cabins. Likewise, Rock Harbor is on the southern side of the northeast end of the island and is the docking location for ferries coming from Michigan. Here you will be able to find a camp store, showers, campsites, as well as lodges and a restaurant. But people did not start coming to Isle Royale, at least somewhat recreationally, to forage and hunt. We cannot discuss Isle Royale without talking about the copper rush. Copper was a common metal to find, with some of the mining areas dating as far back as 3000 BC, meaning that copper was being harvested well before the mid-1840s copper rush. And since we can't discuss Isle Royale without talking about the copper rush, we also cannot talk about the 1840s and Isle Royale without talking about Charlie and Angelique Mott. In 1845, Lake Superior was mostly wilderness. There were only two settlements in the Keweenaw Peninsula, which were Fort Wilkins and Sault Ste. Marie. Beginning in 1843, the Upper Peninsula in Michigan began to see heavy mining activity, where masses of people were coming to the area in search for copper. 1845 was the peak of the copper rush, seeing miners, explorers, scientists, and investors looking to strike it rich. In all, an estimated 750,000 tons of copper were mined from the area. So one day, when Mr. Douglas, Mr. Bernard, and some other men came to town and met with Charlie Mott, they convinced him to come to Isle Royale and search for copper. Charlie, having jumped on the bandwagon, was a copper prospector. He was newly married to his 17-year-old wife, Angelique, and they met with these men in La Pointe, Wisconsin. Angelique was an Ojibwe woman who was native to the Great Lakes region. She knew her way around the wilderness. She was heavy-set, but had strong features and never shied away from work. Charlie, though, was also a hard worker, and as hard as he worked, he was also kind to Angelique. When Mr. Douglas and Mr. Bernard met with Charlie, they explained that they were investors and looking to mine copper on Isle Royale, and Charlie agreed that he and Angelique would accompany them to the island to see what they could find. Once they landed on the island, Angelique was walking down the beach when she found a huge chunk of copper buried in the sand where the water was lapping across it. She immediately went and told Mr. Douglas and Mr. Bernard, who were ecstatic to hear this find. They offered a job to Charlie and to Angelique to stay on the island to guard this chunk of copper, along with searching for more. Charlie could do the work and Angelique could cook the food for him. The deal was that they would return in no more than 3 months' time, at which point Charlie and Angelique would return with them. Their offer included $25 a month for Charlie and $5 a month for Angelique, which, if we were to account for inflation, would combine to be a total of $114,210 today. That is a lot of money to earn in just 3 months. Nothing could go wrong, right? Well, Angelique right off the bat was hesitant. She had a bad feeling about this and tried to convince Charlie to decline the offer, but Charlie saw dollar signs and he wanted in. Upon his agreement, the group temporarily returned to Sault Ste. Marie so that Charlie and Angelique could get necessary provisions in order to survive on Isle Royale for 3 months.
There are over 200,000 unsolved homicides in the United States justice system right now. And many of those cases haven't seen the light of day in years, decades in some instances. The case files and evidence are sitting in a box on a dusty shelf in a basement, forgotten by law enforcement and the media, while the families and friends left behind wait for answers and fight for justice. Sometimes there is nobody left to remember or to speak up on behalf of the victim. I'm Arlene.
And I'm Leah. And that is exactly what Box in the Basement sets out to do. To shine a light on those forgotten victims and to bring attention to unsolved murders and disappearances. We want to help families tell their stories, and we want to assist the families and friends of victims find the resources and support they need to continue their fight for justice. Join us every Thursday for new episodes of Box in the Basement, wherever you find your podcasts.
It was here that they met Mr. Cyrus Mendenhall, another investor of the group and one who seemed to be calling the shots. Once he learned what they had found and what they were doing, he told them not to pick up provisions here. It would cost them too much to ship it back to Isle Royale, and that instead they could go to La Pointe, where they could pick up as much as they needed from his own personal stash. And further, he would send a boat in 3 weeks with enough food that they would be able to survive for several months. With this being agreed on, Mr. Mendenhall clapped Charlie on the shoulder with a hand and said that he would personally come get them in 3 months. They would be home before the leaves turned. And this is where the first red flag really stands out in my mind. Mr. Mendenhall promises to send enough food to last several months when he's planning to go get them in 3. And Angelique also sees this as a problem, but she keeps quiet. She keeps quiet when they reach La Pointe and finds that the provisions there includes only half a barrel of flour, 6 pounds of bad butter, and some beans. But they also were given a canoe and a net, so with this addition of fresh fish, she thought they could make do until the supply boat came. On July 1st, they were left on Isle Royale. They built a small one-room hut with enough space to have a fire and a bed and to be able to store their items. But as the weeks passed, no ship was seen on the horizon. The bad feeling settled deep in Angelique's gut when, at the end of summer, a violent storm surged through the area and broke their canoe. Then, soon after, their net broke and still there was no ship. The wind began to cool, the leaves began to turn, and still no ship. It wasn't until snow began to fall and no ship was seen that they realized that not only did the more food fail to reach them, but no one was coming to get them. The question of if they were abandoned here for good or just the winter was raised as they began to ration what little food they had left. By December 20th, all of their food was gone. They turned to eating bark, roots, and berries. They dug holes in the ground searching for anything edible, all while hunger gnawed at them from the inside. No matter what they put in their bellies, the pain didn't just linger. It was presently there, reminding them that they were starving every single day. And they kept track of the days as they passed. Some days the snow was so thick and heavy, or it was so cold outside that they had to stay in their hut. The ground became so frozen that they could no longer dig, and though Angelique was suffering, Charlie suffered the worst. He became depressed. He was difficult to rouse. Some days it was difficult to get him to eat what Angelique was able to find or drink some of the water that they melted from snow. And then one day he began to get sick. He had a fever that seemed to just get hotter and hotter, until one day he shot up out of bed, murmuring about how he was tired of being hungry and that he was going to go kill a sheep so that way he could have something to eat. He grabbed his butcher's knife and began to sharpen it against the stone. And the entire time he glared at Angelique, not hiding the fact that it was her who he had determined was a sheep, and it was her that he was going to kill. But he didn't lunge for her. Instead, he seemed to be waiting for her to look away so that way he could attack. So Angelique sat quietly all day and all night, keeping an eye on him while he gripped the hilt of his knife. Finally, somehow, she was able to get the knife away, and for the moment, the danger was over. And then Charlie's fever broke, and he returned to his normal, kind demeanor. But with the breaking of the fever, Charlie grew weaker. Angelique began to fall into depression and mourned the way life should have been, and in the process, she tried to hide this from Charlie. And then, one day, so quietly that Angelique doesn't know when it happened, Charlie died. Angelique was unsure of what to do next. She washed him and laid him out on their bed, and for 3 days she sat with him and wondered what to do. The ground was too frozen to bury him. She couldn't stand the idea of putting him outside, and if she kept him in their hut, the fire would be too warm and he would decompose. And so she did the only thing that she could think of. She stepped out into the winter and left Charlie behind in their hut. She made a new hut that was smaller despite her being weak and tired. She found comfort in the fire and began to think of it as her friend. All alone, the stories that her elders had told her about the spirits that haunted the islands began to resurface. But it was not the spirits that she feared. Instead, she was terrified that she would succumb to a fever much like Charlie did. She feared that she would lose her mind due to the hunger and the fever, and she feared most that she would find herself making Charlie into soup. And this fear made sense. She, too, was starving to death. At one point, she found nothing to eat for a week, and she prayed for an answer, begged for a sign on what to do next. And then, the next morning, she got up and stepped out of her hut to find rabbit tracks. They were all over the snow surrounding her hut, and she knew what she had to do. Reaching up, she yanked out a lock of hair and began to braid it into a line that she could fix into a snare. She did this several times, leaving several snares, and that same day she caught a rabbit. It was fat, and she was so hungry that she skinned the rabbit and then ate it raw. With her snares made from her own hair, she was able to capture a rabbit about once a week, giving her just enough sustenance. In the time she wasn't checking the snares, melting snow for water, or searching for other sources of food, Angelique tried to sleep, but soon found that it was too difficult, and so she settled on walking. In March, just as the blue skies were beginning to arrive more often than the overcast clouds, she found a canoe that was washed up on shore. She was able to make some minor repairs and figure out how to repair their broken net so that way she could catch a fish or two. And then the birds returned. Spring was on its way, but Angelique was still left in limbo. No one had brought them food. No one had come to get them. Would anyone be coming now? Did they just forget that Charlie and Angelique were here all together? On a calm morning in May, Angelique had just caught and was cooking some mullets, which is a small kind of fish, when her questions were answered by way of a gunshot. The first came as a surprise, and Angelique wondered if she had heard what she thought she did. Then 2 more shots were fired, and with them, she began running towards the sound. When she got to a further beach, she found who was making the noise. It was Mr. Mendenhall, coming ashore, and just off the reef was a ship. Angelique was mixed with a feeling of joy and rage. This was the man who left them, but that was the ship to take her home. When Mr. Mendenhall reached Angelique, he shook her hand and asked her where Charlie was. And she told him he was up in the cabin sleeping. Why don't you go see him? When Mr. Mendenhall and his crew entered the cabin, they found that Charlie was dead. Suspicious, they stripped him and searched him of any clues that Angelique had killed him or tried to eat him, and without the clues, Mr. Mendenhall had to figure out something to do. Almost without prompting, Mr. Mendenhall began to explain that he had no idea what happened to the supply ship. It was supposed to have arrived. He sent it. He had no idea why it didn't show up, which immediately with this information begs the questions, did the crew lie when they returned without food, or did the entire ship go missing and Mr. Mendenhall just never consider that it didn't reach Isle Royale? He also never addressed that he did not come get them after 3 months as he promised. It was Captain John McKay who pulled Angelique aside and told her that he, Mr. Mendenhall, was lying. He had never actually sent the ship to restock their foods, and the reasons were simple and cruel. Mr. Mendenhall, from the start, intended to let Charlie and Angelique starve to death over the winter on Isle Royale. He would then return in the spring to retrieve the copper that they had found, allowing them to do all the work without having to pay them. Angelique and her experience stands as a testament to how strong women truly are, especially at a time when they were considered weak and lesser by men, and as an Indigenous woman at that. It is worth mentioning that Angelique's story seems to have been erased from time. Her story, in her words, was once printed in the book The Honorable Peter White, which was written by Ralph D. Williams. But this entire story was a footnote in the book and only in the original publication in 1907. When reprints were done, edits were made, and the entire footnote was removed from the book. To this day, it is the only written account of what happened to Charlie and Angelique Mott and what the experience was like of starvation on Isle Royale. While the winds wreak havoc on the island, Charlie's ghost cannot be swept away, for it is etched in the very stones of Isle Royale. Legend says he is a restless spirit that still wanders the rugged shorelines, searching endlessly for the food that never came. He is said to seek not just sustenance, but also a reckoning, a phantom forever haunting those who betrayed him. It is in the silence that the terrible history and secrets lie. Thank you for listening. We'll talk next week. Bye. What is life without close calls with disaster? Thank you for listening. Don't forget to follow the podcast to be the first to hear the now weekly episodes. Join our subscription on Patreon, Apple, or Spotify today and immerse yourself in the haunting beauty of the great outdoors. For around $4 a month, you'll get exclusive access to the first episode of each month and early access to all other episodes, showcasing the morbid and mysterious side of nature. Please reach out with story requests, and if you have your own story, please email tragedywithaview@gmail.com for a chance to have your story featured on a later episode. Again, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.